Hey guys, welcome to Geckoverse channel. This is our hobbyist workshop. I'm Joe with Wildcard Geckos.
I'm Reese with House of Reps.
We wanted to bring you in today and go into a little bit of an in-depth read on filial breeding. Reese and I both put a ton of time into fact-checking as much as we could here. Obviously, if we've gotten anything wrong or if you know something we don't, feel free to let us know that in the comments. We can always make future videos. Before I get started, I want to draw your attention to the bottom right corner of this page. You can see that we put some filial equations down there for those that need a mathematical perception on what we're talking about. So with that being said, we're going to go ahead and open up our key talking points here. We're going to start with number one. What is filial breeding? And for that, we're going to be explaining the filial F generation system. We're going to break down F1, 2, 3, and etc. And we're going to discuss the differences between filial generations and back crossing. So, that being said, here we go. Now, one of the purposes to filial breeding when you get started, you need to have a reason to do it. And the reason is that you're trying to lock in a specific look or you're trying to create a new morph.
All right, so we're going to talk about how it works. So, P1, parental generation, the original unrelated individuals used to start a breeding project. These are the foundational breeders that contribute their genetic traits passed down. So, they're going to create your F1s. Your F1s is your first filial generation, the direct offspring of those P1s pairings. So, you'll have a lot of the traits from F1 inherited 50-50 genetically mixed from both parents, and you will use that F1 to F1 to create your next generation of F2s. Those F2s, you're going to breed those together to create your F3s. And you're going to keep more genetic recombination occurrences, leading to more variation.
So, that being said, genetic diversity is huge. However, hybrid vigor is also something that you need to understand. So, hybrid vigor is going to be your F1s and your P1s. And what it means is that they're the ones with the strongest genetic diversity. They have less recombination in them, they are not related to one another. But F2 and down, basically, you have less vigorous animals that you have to keep an eye on.
So, traits become more stable as we selectively breed. Not every F1, F2 you're going to keep. They might not have the desired look that you want. So you're going to selectively breed and keep it going from there. So, some of the potential risks. If you're not outcrossing, genetic diversity may decrease, leading to inbred traits and risks, which you don't want to occur. Line breeding versus outcrossing. Some breeders use line breeding, breeding within the same line or reinforced traits, while others potentially outcross to new geckos or new genetics to maintain health and vigor.
Now we're going to go over into back crossing. I'm going to go ahead and kick us off with what is back crossing. So back crossing is, I've gotten all the way down to year 3. We're at F2. And the F2s are going to be recreating my F3s. I'm going to be selectively picking out animals that hopefully look good. They will be less genetically diverse and also less vigorous because they are slightly inbred at that point. That being said, we want to be able to take them back to lock in those selective traits that we desire for our animals to go into. Remember, we're creating a morph here. So we take the animal from F3, if we take it all the way back to P1, the parental generation that you started it all off with, that would be what would be considered back crossing. Now you're going to remember that your P1s create F1s each time. However, this is also a form of inbreeding, so you need to add some letters and a number at the end. That's going to be BC1. It's your first section of back crossing. So your P1s paired to your F3s are going to create F1 BC1. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does.
Well, thank you, Reese.
So, Joe, what happens, say I lose or sold my P1 or my F1, or, something, tragically happened and it passed away? What would I be able to do from there?
Oh, I understand the question. Okay, so if P1 no longer is available, let's say you purchased F1 and the original parents belong to the breeder you got them from, right? But you did grab siblings and you are going for that look. So basically, what you would do is you would obviously only have F1 as your base animal instead of, parent one, or either of the parent ones, you should say. So if you get to F3 and you bring that back to F1, one of the myths is that F1 only creates F2s. It's true some of the time, and there's actually a time when it's not 100% true. Right now, consider that you are back crossing your F3 to F1 because you still can lock in those desired traits. You just don't have the original parents. So your
Yeah.
F3s or F4s going back to F1, original siblings, most genetically diverse F1, are going to create F2s. And it's going to be F2 BC1 for back cross 1. Now, if you were to take your F2 BC1s, pair them, and create F3 BC1s, and then take one of those back to your F1, you would then be creating F2 BC2, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay,
Now,
okay.
at this point, Reese, there's a lot of inbreeding going on here. I don't
Oh
know that
yeah.
this is
Oh
something
yeah.
that you want to
You're
do,
gonna have to
but
outcross here eventually.
for the sake of locking in a look, if you haven't gotten there yet, that's where we're at. All right. So, Reese, why don't you go into some of the negative effects with filial breeding, some of the risks that you might take or notice?
For sure. So with filial breeding, obviously we're inbreeding to an extent, and that's how we kind of got Black Knights. We inbred, or the person inbred for what, almost 10 to 15 years, and now we have a lot of defects within the hobby. So you don't want to go too far. So there's a lot of risks still here at the same time. So we got inbreeding depression, which reduces the health, weaker immune systems, and lower fertility due to the excessive inbreeding within the same gene pool. So there's also like genetic bottlenecking, a loss of genetic diversity from repeated filial breeding without outcrossing, making geckos more prone to inheriting disorders. We got increased
Dang.
health risk, some undesirable traits such as kink tails, deformities, and metabolic issues may surface in later filial generations when you're F3s, F4s, and so on. Weaker bone structure, metabolic bone disease, we all know about that, and how it's no bueno. So obviously we want to get away from that. There's also reduced hatch rate and fertility issues, as we talked about before. So not as many eggs, not as many fertile babies, not as many fertile females as you continue that line. Um,
That's interesting. I never really, thought of MBD potentially being, the a defect in an inbred
yeah,
animal. Its ability to absorb calcium is
yeah,
affected like that. That's pretty interesting.
that is new to me too. I thought it was only just a lack of supplementation, you know what I mean, or
Yeah.
care. So
But I
that's
mean, there are absorption issues in other animals, so
Yeah, so
it
that's
makes
cool.
a lot of sense.
That's good to know. Good to know right there. We also got a lot of color and pattern dilution. So certain morphs may become washed out, less vibrant, or inconsistent if too many generations are bred without reinforcing those desired traits. So you want to add in those extra colors when you outcross, add in a darker tangerine or whatever it is that you're going for. You want to add something to it to make it better.
Yeah.
We also got unexpected trait expressions. Even with selective breeding, random traits may appear. You know what I mean? So it might pop out something you didn't even want. But luckily
Yeah.
we have other babies to choose from. So you might even get one baby out of that whole thing that you can use to continue your filial breeding.
Heaven forbid that baby is the one that's not fertile.
Exactly. So there's a lot of risks there as well.
Yeah.
Behavioral changes. Line breeding geckos may start displaying higher stress levels, more aggression. A lot of things could go wrong here. Structural defects, like we see in Black Knights, shorter snouts, smaller bodies, stubby tails, all types of things like that. And then a big lack of hybrid vigor. It all comes down to the health of the gecko. So
Mhm.
we're exchanging the quality of the morph and pattern and the colors for the health of the gecko as it decreases. So you want to keep a balance and maintain. Otherwise, we run into too many issues. Excuse
All
me.
that makes sense, man. I'm really glad you went over those things with us. Obviously, I see a word here, recombination. I want to explain what that is a little bit later. But yeah, resilience of our animals is very important. And so looking for these negative effects to me is important. If you have animals that are starting to show these nasty traits, you definitely should not continue with those ones
Yeah,
or
it's definitely
consider,
time to outcross or
yeah, introduce
backcross.
diversity to the animal's gene pool. All right, let's
Now, I
go to
got a
the next
question for
section.
you, real quick on that. Do you think it would be better when you start to notice those things to instantly outcross or instantly backcross to the grandparents or F1s or F2s?
That's a really good question. I think that with multiple offsprings, you can do both and
True.
see
True.
if, obviously, if back crossing was a mistake, you'll know. And
Yeah.
if obviously outcrossing, I don't think should be a mistake, but the back crossing, you might get away with it. You could try it. If you get to the point where you want to be and you still are holding in that look and you're back crossing, one of the reasons to back cross, the biggest one is to lock in that trait with the
Yeah,
initial
just
parent
reinforce it.
or the initial, grandparent, whichever one you're looking to, to reintroduce that trait. So,
Gotcha.
um, if you're overly inbred and you get down the line, you are technically slightly away from P1, and P1 is going to introduce some genetic diversity into an F3 or 4. It won't be a lot, but it'll be there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so some of our filial equations. You've got your P1 by P1 equals F1 right here on the top. Over here to the right, your two F1s are going to create F2s. Your two F2s are going to create F3s. Two F3s obviously are going to create F4s. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. Back crossing. A couple of things I wanted to draw your attention to. So, if you have an F2 and you take it back to P1, you are creating an F1. But it is an F1 BC1 or back cross 1. If you take your F3 to P1, same exact thing. Doesn't matter if it's an F7, it's going to be an F1. From P1, it goes straight to F1,
So anytime
BC1.
you break the cycle, it comes back to F1.
Correct.
Okay.
If you go back to P1, you're back to F1. So F4 back to F1. Notice the difference there. So we got to F4. Unfortunately, both P1s are gone. I accidentally sold mom. Dad died. I don't know why. It just happened.
Crypto.
So that's going to create something different, right? Your original F4 animal taken back to the original F1s are going to create F2s. So you're going to go from one of the original parents, which would be what the great grandparents of the F4. You're taking it back to them. You're creating an F2 BC1. Now, what if you take an F3 BC1? So you've taken your, if you look right up here where I'm going to highlight, your F1 BC1, you paired those two together, and now you have your F2 BC1s. Then you get all the way to F3 BC1s. You're a few years into the future from your original back cross, right? You take that back to a P1. Let's say you haven't locked in that trait and you're still trying. You've noticed that you haven't had a lot of breakdown in the genetic diversity and the visual of the animal, so
Yeah.
you're going for it. You take the F3 BC1 to a P1. That's going to create an F1, okay? But it's going to be a BC2.
Two. Okay.
Hopefully, you guys noticed that there. You are now on your second set of back crossing, and
So
so it's going to change
basically,
things up.
you did your line breeding for 3 generations, and then after that third generation, you took it back to a parent, and then from that parent and that third generation, you now created new F1s
Yeah.
that are back crossed
Yeah.
too.
And it goes to say you probably won't ever do this, but to understand it is a very important thing, and this
Yeah.
helps you lock in that understanding. So
Nice, man. Nice.
I agree, man. All
And my
right,
math teacher said I wouldn't be doing this when I got older. Look at me now.
send him the video. Terms and definitions, we have those here. They're also going to be in the description down below. We want you to obviously have something to read where it tells you the definition of all the words that you heard us say today. Bringing it down to the bottom here, Reese and I are going to go over the last three, just because those are a little bit more in detail and in depth, and we kind of want to use them as talking points. The first one, Reese, would you like to explain 19 genetic drift to everybody?
19, yes, sir. So, genetic drift, not to be mistaken as Tokyo drift. But, anyways, genetic drift. We're going to genetically drift is a random change in the allele frequencies within a population over generations, occurring by chance rather than natural selection. It has a stronger effect in small breeding groups where certain traits can become more common or disappear entirely just by random chance, not because they're beneficial or selected for.
That's interesting. So that happens in small villages where they're kind of far away from other villages. That
True.
makes sense. That's why over time everybody starts to look like each other.
Mm,
Okay, guys. So obviously you do see recombination here, and it's going to give you a long definition here. Now the definition is accurate. I have looked it up. However, there is a layman terms way of understanding what recombination is. F4 is four generations of recombination, if that makes sense. Read
mhm.
the definition. If you understand it, great. If you don't, you got my layman's terms. F3, three generations of recombination. So your F1s to F1s, your F2s to F2s, your F3s to F3s, those are called recombinations.
Okay.
All right.
So, genetic variation. Genetic variation refers to differences in DNA sequences among individuals within the population. It results from mutations, recombination, and genetic drift. In filial breeding, variation is key for selecting desirable traits, right? But excessive similarity, lack of variation, can lead to inbreeding issues and weaker offspring, as we discussed before.
Absolutely. Trait stabilization is a huge one, guys. You definitely want to go for that look, but you don't want to make a bunch of sick animals doing it, if that makes sense. So outcrossing is definitely
Absolutely.
needed. Bottlenecking, you got to keep an eye on that, and check for the hybrid vigor. Make sure your animals are still, with that big, meaty,
Robust,
strong looking
healthy.
head. So,
Yeah.
all right, guys. So here's a couple of those definitions and terms. We're gonna go into key takeaways with Reese.
All right, guys. So some of the key takeaways we hope you learned from this, F1 is always a direct cross between two P1 parents. Your F2s and beyond introduce genetic recombination leading to the variation or phenotype that you're going for. Later, filial generations, your F3s, your F4s, help stabilize those traits, but require careful selective breeding. So that way we don't run into those negative effects we talked about before. Also, back crossing. And we understand how we can go back to those parents and grandparents, those F1s, to reinforce those specific traits that we, again, are looking for. So bottom line, too much filial breeding, though, without any outcrossing, can lead to genetic problems such as genetic bottlenecking. So we do got to keep an eye out for that. So where a lot of this does help and can help us continue our lines and our morphs and helping us be creative, we still have to be diligent and pay attention to the health of the gecko.
Absolutely. Real quick, Reese, touching on this, I know you had an interesting question, and I wanted to leave the audience with the ability to go look it up and see if they can school us on it in the future.
Okay. Yeah.
So, P1 parents, if you take an F3 back to a P1, would you say a P1 for both parents, or would you say, what was your question?
So my question was, if you're labeling P1 for both mom and mom and dad are both two different genes or morphs, why wouldn't one of them be P2 and the other one be P1? So that way, when you back cross, one would be the mom, which was a different genetic
Mhm.
variation, and then the dad was, 100% different morpher genes as well. So that way, you knew the difference of the grandparent you crossed back to. Instead of labeling both of them P1, I was curious if one would be P2 and one would be P1. So,
Everybody look that up, because what if one of them, P1 is Black Knight dad, P2 would be Gecko Genetics Tangerine, right?
exactly.
And so if
Exactly.
you take F3 back to mom and not dad, you're now reintroducing Black Knight. Now, I don't know the answer to this question. It sounds like you're onto something there, Reese. That's a really good one.
I'm
Hopefully,
gonna look
the
it up
community
after.
can look that up and start filling up the comments with the answer.
Nice. Well, I think that might be it for us today here at the Gecko Verse with our little hobbyist workshop. Hope you guys learned something today. If you didn't and you want to teach us something, feel free to leave a comment, like, and subscribe. Hope this helped. And we're always down to have conversations. So, again, if we said something that was off or you have another question, feel free to reach out. We're always happy to talk about this stuff and learn things as we go. So,
All right, guys. Thank you for watching. We will be seeing you on the next one.